Hi, I'm Alison. I'm here with Lee from the Law School and the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we're talking about the NextGen Bar and how you might need to prepare differently, and we're really excited to introduce a new tool we've been building to help you learn the rules and practice. All right, Lee. Well, we've been on quite the journey with the NextGen, let's be honest. Anyone who's been following anything we've done in the last several years or anything else about the NextGen knows it's rolling out soon, very soon, in July 2026. We are currently in April. And by July 2028, it's going to be the only option.
Yep, pretty much. We even have some inklings that California may be shifting as well.
I think more than an inkling. They pretty much committed to do that starting tomorrow. But we'll see how that meeting goes.
Yes.
But let's be honest. I can't say we've been super enthusiastic about this. I mean, I think the NextGen could be a better exam, but there's been some reluctance on our part to really, really dig into this. But this year, we have really dug in. Isn't that right?
I mean, we strategically have been talking about this for like 4 years, and we really got serious about it really at the beginning of this year. And
yeah,
I think
it's
gone in fully. I mean, we are just in NextGen land. That is like all we talk about every time you and I have our scheduled weekly meetings. This is what we talk about. We are really in it.
Yeah. So if anyone else has been kind of reluctant to think about it, I think we've had a line item of like, figure out what to do with the NextGen for multiple years. We get it. Nobody wants to think about all these changes. But in the end, I think it has some positives. And, you know, we've actually done some really, really interesting stuff we're going to talk about today on rethinking bar prep, I would say. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. I think the NextGen has kind of like cracked open the space a little bit and allowed us to take a step back and really like ask some bigger questions. Like, how do we learn? Like, what does learning theory say about how we learn? And if you are at all neurodivergent, but let's be honest, almost everyone is. I'm not even sure if it's not neurodivergent anymore. Statistically, when you read all the statistics, should you be, exploring different ways to study? And I think that this test has allowed us to really ask these questions in a different way. So for that, I am grateful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I recently had an ADHD diagnosis, which was really interesting and made me kind of rethink like, oh, how is it that I've like done some of this stuff and been successful? And the word I always came back to was really scaffolding.
Yep.
Even when I talked to this psychologist and she was like, you've obviously been successful. Like, how have you done that? I'm like, I just have a lot of scaffolding. And that's one of the things that we're really taking into this tool we've built is like, we need scaffolding, people need different ways to approach this and learn, so the test itself, it's shorter. It is, a different test. We've talked about this before with like the IQSs and the standard, all the stuff. So we're not going to belabor that. But one of the things that's interesting, and I think this is something we've been grappling with and other bar prep companies, providers we've talked to, is the idea that it's a skills exam. So I don't need to memorize, right? And I think trying to get a handle on what this means is been really challenging.
It really has, especially when you sit down and look at the questions that they've, released and you kind of read them. And if you read them, you're like, do I need to know something to take this test? Am I getting like a gut read or am I recalling like a rule? I think the problem is in law school, and everyone who's really sitting for this test is just done traditional law school. They haven't really had time to change how they test in law school. If you're used to an IRAC, you're like, okay, here's my fact pattern. Here's my rule. That should lead me to the answer. and it's not as clean cut as that. So it's not just skills. You absolutely need to have knowledge under that, whether it's recalling a specific rule or kind of recalling kind of basic ways that the law functions. But there's a lot of stuff you need to understand and learn. And I think it's not a fair description to make you think that you don't need to learn anything anymore. You don't need to study. Don't need to memorize, because that just doesn't seem to be the case.
No, and it's interesting, they have these sort of starred topics and non-starred topics. And I had heard about this. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Probably the less important stuff is non-starred. And then I actually really dug into the content scope, and there are some surprises in there.
Yes.
So the starred topics, these are the ones that require, they say, recalled knowledge and understanding. So you are expected to know these cold. No resources are necessarily going to be provided. Other ones are non-starred topics. And it's not like you're going to look stuff up, but they might be giving you resources, or you might just have to identify that this could be an issue that you're going to need to research. For example, I was very surprised to find out homicide is not a starred topic in crim.
This really blew my mind.
Totally.
I thought it was
totally blew my mind.
I thought it was a mistake.
Yeah, same. I went back like 4 times. I was like, this cannot be right. Like, you really don't have to know crimes by heart? And the answer is no.
Nope.
You don't.
Nope.
That is surprising to me.
It is
On the
surprising.
other hand, there is a ton of stuff in Crim Pro, all of which is starred, which I mean, I guess kind of makes sense because that sort of thing, like, your friend might call and be like, I just got arrested, whatever, was this allowed? But even then I was like, I feel like I'd probably want to look that up, Yeah. But yeah, almost all of Crim Pro is a starred topic. So it's just really interesting to see what fits where, I thought.
Yeah. And you cannot make assumptions. I think that that's the thing. Like, I think a lot of students are just going to think that the main issues that come out of some of these subjects are what's starred. And that is not the case. That is
Not at all.
Not at all. You will be surprised. And so
Very.
you need to understand what is in this content scope. And so if you've never downloaded it, you've never looked at it, you should, because it's fascinating. And you want to make sure you understand the differences, because I'm still constantly surprised. In fact, I go back and double check. We've done all this work in this space. We've been doing nonstop work on this for now 3 or 4 months. I don't know. The months are all running together.
It's running a long time.
I mean, it's a long time. And I still, every now and then, will go back and be like, what is in that content scope? Like, is that right? Yeah,
No,
it's
same.
wild.
Multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day, I see stuff where I'm like, that can't be right. That must be a mistake. And then you go and you're like, no, that is literally what is in the scope. So just for context, you can download the content scope for free. I think everyone should, and look carefully at it. It has these 10 subjects. You've got your 7 traditional MBE subjects. They've added business associations as a multiple choice. Family law and PR and wills and trust kind of in there, kind of not, depending exactly on, the day and the year and what we're talking about. But, those are kind of generally in the scope. But yeah, I mean, so you've got that. And then you've also got these source books that are more detailed, but the average person is not going to need to look at those. Obviously, we're looking at those when they come out. But, I think the content scope is a good place to start, just understanding what is actually being tested.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting is it's a little hard to put your finger on what a non-starred topic really means.
Right.
What is the depth of knowledge that you really need to have to work on those non-starred topics? And, I think you need to be able to kind of understand the rule, be familiar with maybe how a rule is applied, but you're not going to have to recite the rule from memory. It kind of makes me think a little bit of like an open book exam, this idea that like, you don't have to have everything memorized, but if I, give you a statute or I give you a rule and I ask you to apply it, you better not mess up.
And also, you need to be able to identify the issue that is raised by that rule. So I think that's one of the biggest things with the non-starred topics. They might give you, a little fact pattern and then say something like, what topics might you need to research further to fully advise your client? So then they give you, say, usually 6 different, sort of things that maybe are relevant, maybe not relevant, and you have to parse through those. And originally I thought those questions would be easier, but as I've started creating more and more of them, I realized they are actually pretty tricky. And I think it's going to be the same thing that people have on the MBE, where one thing is usually pretty obvious. Like, okay, it's obvious like what this question is about. But then the second one, you're often like, I don't know. Like, all these sound like they could be good, or none of them really seem to fit. And I'm not really sure what to do with this. So they're not as easy as I thought they would be.
It's really not. I mean, let's be honest. I was taking these questions that we have been drafting this morning on my couch. And there were some of them where I was like, I got that wrong.
I've been missing them. Yeah.
I know. I mean, they're not that easy.
Even some of the ones I drafted like weeks later, I go back and I'm like, oh, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
That was a good question. I just missed it myself.
Exactly. So I think the reality here is like you may have learned in your law school exams, like open book tests aren't super easy. So these non-star topics are not going to be super easy. You really need kind of more rule fluency on the next gen. You need to be able to apply rules in complex formats. You've got it coming at you from these different types of questions. And it's not just recognizing them. You do have to understand what some of this terminology means. So, if one option was, shareholder derivative suit, which, let's be honest, I remember sort of.
It exists.
It exists. It was part of business associations. It involves shareholders, but I would prefer to know more about that to be able to answer that question, and I think it's that sort of stuff where the practice is going to be really telling for the student who's studying of oh, I don't have enough knowledge to be able to answer some of these questions. But it's not easy. This test is not going to be easy. I think that is a total misconception. I think this test is going to be challenging, especially when we don't have a lot of feedback from people taking it. But there's a lot of work to do. So, yeah.
And I think, for me, the takeaway, which I was a little surprised about on some of this once I really dug into it, is I think the rules are actually really key.
Yeah.
And then not in the way of memorizing them to prepare to write down elements in the way that you might do, with a current essay. Like the MEE requires you to be very precise in your elements and you have to recall them from memory in a certain way. It's not that type of thing necessarily. There may be small elements of that, but less so, I think. But I think this bigger understanding piece is what's going to be a challenge for people because it's different than just sitting down and trying to memorize an outline.
Yeah. I think that and this idea that it's not going to be clear cut for you when you do need to know the rule by heart versus not when you're doing the questions. And I think that has been interesting as I've been drafting practice questions, which is what I do in my free time now. All of it.
And in your work time.
And in my work time and on airplanes and in trains and all of
pretty much all the time.
Basically, if you find me, I'm drafting questions. In fact, I had a flight attendant the other day tell me I worked too much on my flights because I had worked most of the flight. And I'm like, you don't understand. This is the best deep work ever. There's it's white
no
noise.
One can reach me.
No one can reach me. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I do think that it's challenging to get a question and think oh, was I supposed to know that professional responsibility rule? Was I supposed to apply that in this situation? If so, can I do that? It's just not as clear cut. When you took the MBE, you just knew that you were responsible for all the rules. There's just no question. If it's tested, you're responsible for it. And I think the essays are set up that way too. Getting comfortable with this idea that you're not only going to have to issue spot and then decide if you're supposed to use your core knowledge where you do have things memorized verbatim. That's tricky. It's going to be a very different test. It's going to require a lot of practice, getting used to this different format. And I think for some folks, that novelty is going to be tricky.
I agree. And I think fluidity with the rules is one of the things that always I come back to when I think about what am I going to be asked to do? I don't really know. It could come in a lot of different ways. They might ask me in the middle of a question suddenly to pull some information from a totally different piece of law. One of the things with the IQSs is they're going to be integrating multiple legal topics. So it might be that, you're doing an evidence thing and it seems like it's all about evidence. And all of a sudden they're ask you about professional responsibility, and you're wait, what? So I think this back and forth of figuring out where in your brain is this stuff and being really comfortable with some level of retrieving it in different scenarios is really, really critical. The good news is some of this is actually good for your learning too, retrieval practice. Mm-hmm. Every time you have to pull a rule out of your memory, you strengthen those neural pathways. Testing yourself has been found to be 3x more efficient than rereading things. So, I think this passive model of watch a lecture, make an outline, read the outline, quiz yourself on the outline. Even if you're quizzing yourself on the outline, that's better than nothing. But, what you really want to be quizzing yourself in is this format of I'm not just asking you to tell me the rule, I'm asking you to use it in some way. Mm-hmm. So you've got to recognize it, pull enough of it out of your memory to be able to use it, and then apply it. And I think that is the piece that we're really thinking about differently here.
Yeah, because let's go back to kind of the old school way of studying for the bar, right? The old school way, we watch a bunch of lectures, we make outlines, we study those outlines, read those outlines. Maybe we make flashcards, we do some practice questions. This has been the rinse and repeat model forever.
Yeah. I mean, it
Like,
started out a long time ago. You had to be sitting in a room with someone talking to you, and then it became virtual and it was recorded, but whatever. It's basically like someone is imparting information. You are passively receiving it like a sponge, and then you hope to be able to use it on test day.
exactly. But it turns out that passive learning, and we've been talking about this for 10 plus years,
Forever.
we've been working together, is a bummer and doesn't really work. It makes you feel good, you feel productive, but it doesn't build durable memory. And I think that, over the years, you and I have really put in some research on learning about stuff, right? We've talked about spaced repetition. We've talked about different ways to memorize. We've talked about memory palaces and this and that and mnemonics.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
Lots of stuff. But I think for the first time, because we kind of cracked things open and thought about the bar in a different way, we started saying, like, what if we're studying for the bar in the wrong way? Like,
Yeah,
what
basically.
what if this
What if-
way is
Is
kind
it
of broken,
like
but
not
also
working?
not working, and also is not really going to serve you with this different kind of test? And I think that it's been an interesting moment. We talk every day, almost every day, to somebody who has failed the bar, and many of the people we talk to, most of the people we talk to have some sort of ADHD, anxiety, dyslexia, some sort of learning difference or challenge that specifically makes the bar more challenging. So we got a little nerdy, right? We started to dig into science, and it turns out that most of us can't study in the way that the bar has just been teaching us to study. I start cracking open these books, and I'm sending you screenshots, because my mind is blown, where you're saying like, what do you mean we can't study all day? Like, what do you mean that this is?
I already knew that.
You already knew that. You've been talking about the
this
Pomodoro
because
forever.
I mean, I basically cracked open my own bar prep from the beginning only because I immediately realized I was self-aware enough, thank goodness, to realize that is not going to work for me and it is not going to be efficient for me. And I don't have time because I'm also working. And so I just made up my own bar prep from the beginning. And it was really different.
Yeah. So yeah, turns out if you read learning science, it's pretty fascinating. And I wish I'd done that 20, 30 years ago when I was in school. I mean, I don't know. I was a psych major. We didn't even study that stuff in psychology. I don't know. But we kind of got excited about it. We started reading these books. We're taking screenshots. We're kind of learning and talking about different ways to study. And then we realized if we're going to help people practice and learn for this new test, that we can't unsee the science that we've learned. That we really want to do something different. And so that is also now what we spend all of our time on. And it is a new tool, and it's called the RAMP, which stands for Rule Acquisition and Mastery Platform. So Alison, why don't you let us know what that is?
Well, I mean, the idea is pretty simple, actually. What if your study tool actually just used the science? So retrieval practice, spaced repetition, scaffolding, increases in difficulty, all of this, what if we just built it into the way that we interact with this material? So, there's a pretty big gap between I heard this rule, somebody told me, versus I can apply it under pressure. And so what we're trying to do is basically, I don't want to say force, but basically if you use the tool, force people to do this repeatedly. So, if you have anxiety, exposure therapy is basically what we're looking for here. But everything is basically built around this idea of how do we really learn? How do our brains work? When do we need to take breaks? Basically we've built all of this into the tool itself so that it's not like an add-on of it's like accommodations mode or something. It's just actually better for everyone, regardless of whether you are diagnosed ADHD or not, or think you might have it or not. This is actually how we learn. Nobody has that much working memory, for example. So with the scaffolding, the first time you see a concept, we give you a card that explains it to you. And there's a tab that has the rule on it. So now instead of having to be oh gosh, do I kind of remember what shareholder derivative suits are about from a business associations class a year ago? I don't know. You're not having to worry about that. You literally get the rule, work through something, and apply it. Yeah. It's pretty simple.
I know. And one of the other things I really love about the tool, and I was just relishing in this today when I was studying business associations, was that a lot of people learn through context. So I think I might be a little dyslexia-ish. I don't know. That's my new word. Apparently, that's why I'm a terrible speller and maybe not the best proofreader sometimes. I had to create a lot of scaffolding when I would do school projects to be able to like accommodate for that. I just didn't know that was a thing, but
Right.
whatever. But what was interesting is that when I was studying, how different people's brains learn, I learned that context and fact patterns and connecting kind of abstract concepts to something that you can personally associate with is one way people learn. And then it was like this aha moment because I can memorize fact patterns lickety split. You tell me a story, I got that story. I could tell you the story. You give me a phone number, I'm out. It's a good thing I have a cell phone, right? I mean, I still know
Right.
my childhood number, but basically, like, I'm out, right? So you kind of realize, like, oh, like if you give me a rule, but then you tell me like how the rule works, that I'll remember it. And so we were talking, and I was like, could we just like add that to the tool? And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, we can. So
Sure.
today I was doing it and I was loving it because you give a rule about studying a parent's authority today. And then it was like, here's an example of a parent's authority. You call your neighbor and you want them to sell something. To me, I'm like, oh, this is literally how I can memorize things. And it's in here. And I bet I'm not the only person.
I think that's kind of one of the things we've come to as we've, worked on this and kind of expanded this project. So it started out very small. Now it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But for example, I started creating contracts questions to begin with, and I hated contracts. It was not a class that I really like internalized or enjoyed. But I realized I was learning the material as I was testing these questions. And I did not want to learn this material. I have no incentive to learn contracts at this point. But I was actually just learning it by osmosis, basically, and through repetition. And that was my aha moment of like, oh, wait, this really does work, doesn't it?
Oh, and what about actually testing it on a high school senior?
Oh, yeah.
Because a high school senior who has no legal knowledge whatsoever, I asked him to test the tool to see if his accuracy went up the more he did the questions, and it turns out it did. Now, does he have sophisticated legal understanding to maybe do the IQS sets and do all that? Nope, that's fine. I wasn't trying to test that. That would be a poor choice. But was it helping him retain knowledge? Turns out it was. And I think that is pretty cool, that there are different ways to come at this. And it's not flashcards. Oh man, I hate flashcards. And which is apparently also a dyslexia thing. Did you know that like dyslexics hate flashcards? They do not work. For the dyslexic mind. Didn't know that.
The things you learn.
The things you learn over time. But I do think that what's interesting is to really say, I'm going to do this high impact studying. It's going to force me to wrestle with material. I'll be honest, it doesn't make you feel awesome because it's heavy lifting, but it's really targeted. And there's like, you're not just going to wonder what you did all day. And I think that that's so often the feedback we get from people with standard bar prep is, well, I studied all day. And I'm like, but what did you learn?
What did you take away with you for later?
Right. And often the answer is not so much.
Yeah, not so much.
So much. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the tool. So we've talked about that, we've got these different levels of scaffolding. We've even got some multiple choice questions, everybody's favorite, including the new types of multiple choice questions in this new format of picking two. Which feels different. I know. Sometimes I have to remind myself that you have to pick two because I'm so used to picking one, even if there are a lot of options.
Well, Lee, I was just working on this little bug today where now you can only submit your answer if you've picked two, which is actually good training because people should train themselves to always pick two because there is no harm in guessing. So if you're listening to this and you're not sure if you should go ahead and pick the second one you're not sure about, pick it.
Yes. So we also kind of we have this loop where you can study the material using kind of all of our scaffolding. You're going to do this recall. You're going to space repetition. You're going to test yourself using multiple choice questions. And what's cool is that testing is going to be linked back to the substantive testing. So it's all in this one universe. So if you're struggling with something on multiple choice, it's not going to be like your responsibility to wonder how you go review the rules anymore because we're going to send you back to that spot.
Yeah, you literally just click the link. And some of them I'm like, oh, that was surprising. Why did I miss that question? And I'm like, go back and I'm like, oh, because I got that part of the rule wrong. And that's actually how you learn. Right. Getting things wrong is how your brain learns things and retains them.
Yes.
So again, like you don't necessarily feel great if you do a set of practice and you're like, wow, I got 50% of that. But you can immediately see what you missed and get back into it and correct those misperceptions right in that moment. And I think that's really like where a lot of the value happens. Another thing that I think is kind of fun that I added, sorry, I'm like totally nerding out on this, is on the multiple choice practice, if you're just doing practice, you're not in a test mode, you're just practicing the actual practice questions, you select how certain you are. And this is something we've had our students do for a long time, but on a piece of paper. But now you just click like, I'm guessing, or I'm leaning to the answer, but I'm not sure, or I'm 100% sure on this. And at the end, you get a breakdown of how you did in each part. So if you are missing a lot of questions that you were sure about, that is a different problem than like getting ones right that you were guessing on.
Yeah. So you're getting all this data.
Yeah.
The data is like in this contained universe. It's the place where you learn the law. It's the place where you practice the law. And the data gets to speak to each other and is really rich and robust. And I think that that is very cool because we don't like to waste time.
Yeah.
And you want to be doing targeted practice. So you get a lot of different question types. You're going to get like fill in the blank questions and matching questions and short answer questions and multiple choice questions. But you're going to touch the rules in all of these different ways. And it turns out novelty, which is the way that we like interact with something in a different way, that helps us learn. And so we're trying to, again, use some of this science to say, we're going to give you a lot of options. And one of these is probably going to resonate with how your brain works because we are all unique individuals.
Yeah, one of the things I found really interesting that you uncovered in some learning theory stuff was that this idea of interleaving different topics is actually useful. So like maybe after you've done a first pass, get yourself situated, you've done all the questions, the spaced repetition is probably going to mix it up for you. So it might seem weird that you're getting like a question on contracts and then a question on torts. But that's actually, again, like triggering some stuff in your brain that helps you learn the material. So I found that interesting because that is not the way that things are generally structured.
Yeah, you're just in one universe.
Right. You're in like
stay in evidence for days.
Yeah, for days or weeks on end. And then you switch and you don't look at evidence again. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like, yeah, of course, your brain, your spaced repetition stuff's going to get in there differently. But so again, like that's kind of a way that a lot of this is going to play out. So you can do mixed sets, you can do single subject. And, we have ideas on how you might want to do it, but maybe one thing works better for you and you can do that.
Yeah. So I mean, as you can tell, like we're pretty excited about this.
We're pretty dorked out on it.
We're pretty dorked out on it. But here's the other piece that I don't think we've really talked about, which is we also did some really interesting reading on how long we can pay attention.
Yeah.
So, and this is not new science. And I think the new science is probably even worse because I was just reading an article about how middle-aged people are giving themselves cognitive decline by scrolling on their iPhones.
Oh, yeah.
Which I unfortunately read while I was scrolling on my iPhone. I don't know. Anyway, that's like a whole nother podcast. But listen, all of our attention is fractured. It's a complicated time in the world. And so it turns out even under the best of circumstances, this means you do not necessarily have ADHD or ADD. You do not necessarily have a diagnosed condition. We really work the best in 20-minute chunks.
Yep, short blocks.
20 minutes. Yeah. So that's not awesome when you think about it, because when we think about how we've been studying, most of us don't study in 20-minute blocks unless you do the Pomodoro method, basically. And I can tell you when we did back in our bar prep days, those lectures were not in 20-minute blocks. And I know that Themis and some other providers have shortened some of their lectures into these more manageable chunks. But I think this idea that you're supposed to attack this in almost these modules and these chunks of time is also going to change how you study, because you're going to be more efficient because you're not just wasting time. But it is going to be an interesting shift because if you do this focused work and then you take a micro break and come back to do more focused work, you're going to see better outcomes, which is pretty cool. But that's not the way that we have been taught that we learn. But that's what the science says. It's pretty clear. It's pretty settled science. It's not really out there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an adjustment. And, we put in things like timers and things pop up to be like, how are you doing? Are you feeling really tired? Maybe take a break, stuff like that, which I think there's some guilt around with bar prep, of like, I can't take a break. I must just sit here. But really, it's not generally the best option.
No. And also, I'm just going to put in a plug. When you take a break, like take an actual break, like get up, take a drink of water. Do not open your phone because the phone makes the attention issues first. Like take a real break and you can check your email or something later. But micro breaks should be like giving your brain a reset, not just diving into Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not saying like, oh, you only study 20 minutes and then go do something else. It's
20-minute
like you might have a 3-hour block, but within that block, you might be studying in like 20 to 25-minute chunks with maybe a 5 or 10-minute break, and you take a walk, or you get up and do some yoga. I don't care, but yeah, you don't get to use your phone basically in that block.
Yeah. I don't know, everyone. We think it's pretty cool. Clearly, we spend a lot of time on it, but I think the idea that the science is showing us a different way to learn. And when we go back and think about the lessons we learned and the lessons that we have been teaching other people for almost 15 years now, 14, 15 years. I mean, it's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
It comes back to this tailoring your study for the way that your brain learns. And this isn't just like, are you an auditory learner?
Right.
This is about like the neuroscience about how your brain learns. And can you study better to get better outcomes? And I think the science and the books I've been reading have said yes.
I will also say it's actually, I don't want to say fun, but it's definitely more fun.
Like, low bar.
Yeah, there's a pretty low bar, but there is something about that dopamine hit of like, oh, I learned something, I improved, I got that one right. It's actually more fun than just sitting down and trying to like watch or learn or read or whatever for like an hour on the end, and then you're tired at the end. The novelty aspect is real, basically. Your brain kind of likes novelty.
Yeah. And it likes dopamine hits, as we all know. So, like, here you go. Bar prep and dopamine.
I mean, like you said, it's a low bar, but it's more fun.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's just productive. And so much of bar prep time feels wasted. And I think that it's the idea that the time is productive, that you are learning, that you are practicing, that you are applying. And then you're going to be able to, do all of this practice, and it's all linked together. I think that's powerful stuff. And it's in a way that we haven't really seen out there. So we just decided to build it ourselves.
Yeah. And I think one of the things also that you came up with in your research was this idea, I don't remember exactly but something like manageable like stretch or something like that, where it's like it's a little bit challenging, but it's not too much. So I think that's kind of what the scaffolding approach gives you is like, oh, okay, this might be like a new concept for you, but you can do a fill in the blank question on it. Like, come on, and then it kind of ramps up a little bit to get a little bit harder, And now you're doing a multiple choice. And then eventually you're writing a short answer on that same topic. So it's kind of giving you that step up process where you're getting a challenge pretty consistently, but it's a challenge that's within your grasp. It's not just like, here is an MEE question, you watched a lecture, go for it.
Well, today I was listening to my elementary school age kid memorize like a few lines about Greek mythology because they're doing like a little play. And so like the names are hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not like, these are complicated words and complicated names. And I was listening to her break it into manageable chunks. She was like, like doing the first phrase and then the second phrase. And then she would put the first and the second phrase together. And then she would do the third and the fourth phrase separately until she got those names. And I'm watching her do it. And it was really one of those moments when you're like, wow, children kind of know how to learn. And it's like we unlearn, because then I went to sit and do this work and I'm like, oh, we're basically kind of doing it the same thing. We're taking it in chunks. We're trying it different ways. We're putting it together different ways. We're testing us, right? She'd run in to say it to me and she'd make a mistake and she'd go back. And I'm like, oh, yeah, look at that in real time.
Maybe it's not that complicated.
Yeah, I know. So true. So I guess the really exciting thing is this project that we thought would take us a few weeks has turned into months and months and months. But it's almost done.
It's almost done. It has expanded a lot.
A lot,
but it is done. It is ready for you guys to start trying out. We're going to give you the Business Association's full module, totally free. This is not a teaser. It is not time limited. We don't want your credit card. You get the whole subject. You get the ramp scaffolding. You get the practice questions because we had to write them all.
Again,
may as well give them away. But yeah, I think this is really cool because people can just basically go and try it. And if it works for you, that's awesome. If it doesn't work for you, well, it didn't work for
No
you, that's
problem.
cool. You wasted 20 minutes of your life. Sorry, we're not going to give that back to you, but maybe you learned something. But yeah, we're super psyched. You can just go to barexamtoolbox.com/ramp. We'll put the link in the show notes. You can sign up for a trial and give it a whirl. We would actually literally love to know what you think about it. Good, bad, ugly. We want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And we decided to start with business associations because it's new to the NCBE, UBE, NextGen world.
In the multiple choice.
In the multiple choice, thank you. But yes, so there's not a lot out there. There's not history for the subject in multiple choice questions. So everybody's kind of starting from scratch. So, many of you probably didn't even take it in law school.
Yeah.
Or if you, like me, took it in law school, I didn't pay as much attention as I could have.
I feel like the only thing I really took away was like there's a business judgment rule, and that is pretty much what you talk about. But turns out there's actually a lot of other stuff about like agency relationships and derivative liability and all this stuff that just I was like, well, I do not want to think about this, but here we are.
My corps professor used to say piercing the corporate veil in this very weird way. He'd go like piercing the corporate veil, and that's basically what I remember. I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah.
No. Nope. So we didn't include that in the tool. I was like, not helpful. There are no like weird ways to say things.
No, but I think everybody should just go, try it out. If you eventually want to buy the full one, feel free. We're not going to bother you with all the details on that. But yeah, give it a whirl. See what you think. I don't know, we're super psyched about it. And we're happy to have people give it a whirl and give us some thoughts.
Yeah. So if you're taking the Next Gen in July 2026, dive in right now because you're going to see this stuff pretty soon. July is coming up fast. You should already be working on some of your rule foundation or be very close to it. If you're a current 2L or you're graduating, mid-year, I think starting early with something like RAMP is a low pressure way to begin. Even 15 to 20 minutes a few times a week can make a difference. I mean, that's kind of what's cool about this idea is that this tool can be a study snack that you kind of fold in over time. And if you're a repeater or you're a working professional, you're studying for a longer timeline, the spaced repetition approach really helps you move things into long-term memory. And that is really designed for shorter sessions because you're not going to have a ton of time. So you can really utilize that science behind that. And honestly, if you're someone who's just struggled with these traditional bar prep formats or traditional ways of studying in law school, I mean, we designed RAMP for all of the students and all of the people we've talked to over the last, almost 15 years. And because, that's really who we've seen struggle and that's really who we want to help. So we're going to continue to talk about that in future podcast episodes. So stay tuned for more on that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Please subscribe so you don't miss anything. Check out barexamtoolbox.com/ramp to get your free trial and reach out with any questions.